Hello, welcome to my lovely bones quickfire guide. And by quickfire, I just mean kind of doing all the basics, going through the characters, going through the themes, genre, context, and then some key terms that you should be doing, as well as some examples of questions. I am on the A level English Language and Literature AQA qualification, but I'm sure this would apply to people on other exam boards or not doing the combined course. So, beginning with themes, justice and injustice, that's a huge one. Obviously, Mr. Harvey is never brought to justice. Despite people learning to know what he's done, he's never caught by the police. This is disputed by some, saying that his death brings him to justice a little bit, and I agree, but it would be nice to have legal justice. Grief and tragedy, of course, this is a tragic story, and a lot of people are grieving in it, including Susie herself. It's kind of an obvious one. Isolation, that's huge. The opening prologue to the book is about that snow globe, and I would say that that is a huge moment to talk about isolation, and it then becomes an ongoing theme, especially with Susie feeling isolated from her family and friends up in the wide, wide heaven. Jack feeling isolated because his wife isn't on the same page as him. Lindsay feeling isolated, kind of being on her own to sort everything out. There's a lot of isolation going on. And then there's literal isolation as well. For example, there's Mr. Harvey sitting alone in his house. There's Susie who's stuffed in a safe, all on her own. Like, there's a literal isolation as well as emotional. Love is a big one, or the lack of it. Susie holds a lot of love for her family, and they hold a lot of love for her. You can see love in all kind of ways. There's familial love, there's platonic love, there's romantic love with Susie and Ray, and Abigail and Len. Or you could, well, it's disputed whether there's any actual romance there, but that's a whole other discussion. So there's a lot going on. Family and community, obviously that's a big one. The Salmon family gets torn apart, but there's a good arc where towards the end it all comes back together. They become a family again. They can kind of move on. Obviously, there's Lindsay and Sam. They build a family. They have a child. There's Ray and Susie being in love. There's the lack of family and community for Mr. Harvey. He's totally on his own, totally isolated. As you can see, a lot of these themes cross over. And there's the community that Ray and Ruth build when they're doing like the candlelit vigil and things like that. And finally, I've added innocence and experience because, of course, Susie was very innocent. She was 14 when she was murdered, and suddenly she's got all this experience all in one moment, and then she dies. And she kind of lives experience and losing her innocence through into the afterlife as she watches Lindsay lose her virginity. She watches her mother have an affair. So there's lots of that going on. Obviously, there's more themes. It's kind of, this is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the key ones. Then genre and context. So they kind of go hand in hand, which is why I put them together. Genre-wise, it's horror, it's a melodrama, there's magical realism. I think this is really key, and you can kind of bring it up in any essay that you do, because it's a realistic world. It is just like your regular street. There's regular people. The only real kind of magical fantasy element to it is that Susie's in heaven and she can look down on Earth, that she can kind of communicate with the Earth and like blow out the candle, and things like that, and Ruth's ability to see the dead. Other than that, there's not much magic or fantasy going on, so that's why we put it in the magical realism genre, as opposed to high fantasy, which would be something like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, because of course that world is, filled to the brim with magic. Next one is also a huge one, really good for any essay, is the suburban gothic. What this basically is the idea that horror and evil can be hidden in plain sight in suburbia. So suburbia was really, really common in the 1970s in America. lots and lots and lots of houses that all looked the same on rows and rows and rows of streets of houses were being built. So, people could kind of be hidden totally in plain sight. Lots of families moved into these places, but also people like Mr. Harvey. And that's why Mr. Harvey kind of goes unnoticed and doesn't really get caught, is because he's just the same as everyone else. He's just sitting in his house, he's got a car, he's got a job, he's just kind of hidden in plain sight. It's, of course, a tragedy. And then Bildungsroman. Now, if you haven't come across this term, it's a really good one to learn. It basically just means coming of age. It's a German word. But it's a little bit better if you use this instead of coming of age. Examiners like it. It's vocabulary, it's use of good vocabulary. This is really important because Susie goes through a kind of Bildungsroman arc. She grows even after she's dead. Lindsay is huge for coming of age. When it comes to more context, this book was released just after 9/11. So people really took it into their hearts and read this and really loved this book at the time because they were grieving and they needed something about family and about getting through tough times. So that's really helpful if you're talking about family or just really anything. Like, just bring it up. Bring up as much context as you can. I always do that at the beginning of an essay, at the beginning of my point, and then it's just out of the way, it's just done. So you can always bring that up. Second wave feminism. Now, that was huge. It was happening in the 70s. Women were becoming empowered, they were having riots. It was great. And Siebold really brings this into the book. It's not explicit, it's more implicit. Lindsay is huge for this. I mean, being part of boys' sports was unheard of. And it's Susie even says in the book that women were kind of soft and pudgy and did the house stuff. It's also quite pertinent with regards to Susie not being able to run away because she wasn't a runner. Young women weren't expected to be good at sports. It's also relevant to Ruth because she is a known feminist. She reads feminist literature. She draws nudes, and this gets her in trouble. And then also, this is quite pertinent for Abigail because she didn't want to be a mother, but she's fulfilling this sort of societal expectation. Milk carton kids. Now, if you haven't heard of this, I know I have a picture of them coming up, but more and more children were beginning to go missing at this time. The 70s was huge for a lot of crimes. There were more children going missing. And they had this new initiative to put missing children on milk cartons because you would just be looking at it when you're having your breakfast or something. You kind of read the carton, go, oh, I'll keep an eye out for this person. So that was a huge initiative. And then in Siebold's history, this is quite important and useful to bring up when you're discussing the rape of Susie, because this book is semi-autobiographical. Emphasis on the semi. Because Siebold was raped while she was at college, I believe, and she was just left, I think, like in a bridge, under a bridge. And this is a huge part of Siebold's inspiration. She has, I believe, a memoir called Lucky, which describes this a bit more. I haven't read it. I personally struggle with Siebold because of what she did to the man that she said was her rapist, but that's not relevant to the book, so I won't get into it. But it's just good to note that she's drawing from her own experiences, and if the scene you're doing is about when Susie is getting raped and murdered, it might be good to bring that in. Here's just a picture of the new wave feminism and those milk carton kids. Now, I want to do a kind of deep dive into the characters. Here's a list of them on the screen, and then I'm going to go into more detail on some of them. So starting off strong, we have Susie Salmon. I should hope you know who this is. She is the protagonist of the book. In the very first chapter, we hear that she gets raped and murdered by one of her neighbours, George Harvey. She is 14 years old at the time. She is a homodiegetic narrator. Now, this is a really, really key term to hold on to, so I'm going to emphasize that right now. A homodiegetic narrator is a character who is in the story and narrating it. She's also omniscient. meaning that she sees everything that's going on. She knows everything. She knows the character's thoughts. She knows everything. But hold on to that term, homodiegetic narrator. It is key. You can use it in literally every essay because there will always be a quote you can use that shows that Susie is the one narrating. So hold on to that one. Direct address. She often directly addresses the reader. And this is really important because it puts you in the story. And that builds more of a connection between you and Susie. It makes you feel like you're being spoken directly to. And that is key to what Seabold is trying to do. She's trying to build this connection, make you feel the emotions that Susie is feeling, and make you think even more about the story. And then, there we go, the posthumous Bildungsroman. I already touched on that. George Harvey. So this is our antagonist. He is the rapist and murderer of Susie Salmon. He is 36, I believe, and he is just lives across the road to Susie. And the unfortunate event happens in a cornfield. This is a really important location where he's built a kind of hole in the ground where he's got, a shaving knife, he's got cans of soda, and he claims to have made a den for the children of the neighborhood. When Susie is walking back from school one day, he invites her in, and she follows him in there, and at that point she's kind of helpless to escape. He is a psychopath. There wasn't really any development into psychopathy at this time, but we can see this by the fact that it is compulsion. He feels the need to do these acts upon people. As I said there, he's a serial rapist murderer. This is not his only victim, and it's not his last victim. We see him attempt it again later on, but he's certainly a psychopath. One scene that demonstrates this really well is when he's sort of setting all his alarms to open and close the blinds, and he just sits in his room, and he's got all these very particular things to do. Additionally, he was murdering cats, and this is a really common thing in real life true crime cases. You see a lot of famous murderers grow up and killing animals at a young age, and it then develops into human beings. Next up is Lindsay Salmon. This is Susie's sister, and she is hugely important to the plot. Without her, we wouldn't have had the evidence that George Harvey is the murderer all along. She is strong. She is fierce. She's not kind of constrained into any societal expectations or anything. And she fills Susie's shoes really well and becomes her own person without just clinging on to her dead sister, which is truly difficult to do. She has a Bildungsroman arc. We watch her grow up. She's the rock of the family. She literally tries to be a rock in one scene. She pulls herself up, does push-ups, tries to harden herself. And we see her fall in love, and we see her lose her virginity and have a child, and we watch her grow up, and she really successfully moves on and becomes what Susie couldn't become, but on her own terms. Feminism is huge here because of this, because she's so independent, because she joins the boys' sports team, because she cuts her hair short at the end of the book. And then love. Love is a huge one for her. She falls in love with Sam Heckler. She has a child, and Susie can feel her love from heaven. She kind of gets all her love through Lindsay, so that's hugely important. Next, we have Abigail and Jack Salmon. These are Susie's parents. They are two totally opposite ends of the spectrum of how people react to difficult circumstances. I'd say that Jack is very much the fight, and Abigail is very much the flight. Jack is obsessive about finding who did this to his child, to the point of recklessness, and he does unfortunately attack Clarissa, and a partner who are just necking it in the field. But he's really dedicated to bringing justice to what has happened to Susie. Whereas Abigail runs away. She runs to an affair and she literally runs away and leaves the family. And that just shows that she kind of just wants to escape. She knows it's done now. She knows that her child is dead. She just needs to like run away from that idea. Additionally, Jack is a really dedicated father. Whilst he's preoccupied about Susie and he does kind of neglect everyone else because of it, he's nevertheless a brilliant father to Buckley and to Lindsay. We see him helping Lindsay to shave her legs. We see him being really caring and he sticks around. Whereas Abigail never wanted to be a mother. We see this when she's kind of disgusted by Buckley calling her mummy, and at the fact that she is upset that she didn't go on and get a degree and learn about her classics. So her running away was kind of expected in a way, because she became a mother when she didn't want to, and then her child was plucked from her, and that's just really difficult to handle. And then yeah, Jack really, really wants to bring justice to what has happened. And Abigail's very secretive. Whole description of Susie taking pictures of her mother on her birthday and seeing into those ocean eyes is huge, because it shows just how secretive she is, how guarded she has become, and how little we or the characters know her. Okay, Ray Singh and Ruth Connors. These are two side characters, but nevertheless extremely important. Now, let's start with Ray. He was Susie's love interest. He was Susie's first kiss. Now, I find this really interesting in contrast to Susie's kisses with Mr. Harvey. When she describes her kiss with Ray, she describes it as dry. He had chapped lips. With Mr. Harvey, she describes him as wet and kind of slobbery. And I find that a really, really interesting juxtaposition that you could bring up in an essay about love or her relationship with Ray or something along those lines. He also drives the plot in that he's a key suspect in Susie's death. He slipped her a love note in her book, and the police find this and immediately jump on him as a suspect. And this isn't just because he knew her, it's because he's Indian. And it's the 1970s in America. Unfortunately, it was very racist, and it still is. So he is a key suspect in the investigation, and he never really recovers from this. He becomes quite isolated and withdrawn after this whole situation. And then you have Ruth Connors, who is weird. She's the weird girl at school. She draws nude drawings of women and she reads feminist literature. You know, she's supposed to be odd. So like I said, she's a feminist and she connects with Ray when Susie dies. She was just beginning to become friends with Susie before she died. And then as Susie leaves the earth as a ghost, she brushes by Ruth and like touches her. And this gives Ruth a level of spiritualism that's really, really key. She can kind of feel Susie. And no one believes her, but she can. And Ray is kind of the only one that sees that she has this connection and is obsessed with Susie as he is. And additionally, later on in the book, we see that she can see all kinds of dead people, victims of murders and rapes and abuse. And like I said, she's kind of Susie's direct connection to Earth. This kind of all culminates in one scene towards the end of the book when Ray and Ruth have sex. Ruth sees Mr. Harvey's car and she sees spiritually a lot of his victims, and it causes her to pass out. And Susie and Ruth kind of switch places, where Ruth is really, really praised for seeing these dead people and writing them down and just knowing who they are, while Susie inhabits Ruth's body and she and Ray have sex. This just brings a kind of a good ending. Susie gets to be with her love, as does Ray, and Ruth sees that what she's doing is good. Now, to add my personal opinion, I think Siebold was really weird for doing this, because Ray was imagining a 14-year-old, and also Ruth is most likely a lesbian, so this is very violating. But don't talk about that in your essay. I just had to add it because I don't think it's a good thing, but you're supposed to see it as a good ending, so write it that way. Okay, on to Len Fenneman. Now, this is the lead detective on Susie's case. He is the first one to show up, and he's a constant person on the crew. He's a very interesting character, and he came up on the exam last year, so the 2025 summer exams, depending on when you're watching this. He's very interesting. He has a wallet full of all of his old cases, so Susie is also in there, including his wife. He's a widower, his wife passed away, and he hasn't solved that mystery. He is the romantic interest for Abigail. So, as I said before, Abigail not only physically runs away, but before this, she runs away into an affair. When Jack is in hospital, she sees Len outside, and that's when it begins. This is really common, unfortunately, for parents who have experienced the death of a child or something really traumatic in their family. It's really common for the couple to split up. And Abigail, again, is trying to just leave this awful place that she's in physically and kind of ascend to a happier place. And part of that is leaving her husband, who is still obsessing over what happened to Susie. It's also really key that Len is essentially a failure. He doesn't listen to Jack when Jack repeatedly says that Mr. Harvey is the murderer. Because he doesn't have any evidence, this isn't a huge criticism on him, but he feels like a really huge failure at the end when it becomes obvious that it was Mr. Harvey. But at that point, it's too late because Mr. Harvey has fled. And he has repeatedly been a failure. We see this with the amount of photos he has in his wallet. Not only people he doesn't know, but also his own wife. Okay, and now all the other characters. I kind of put these all together, not because they're not important, but because they're not as important. So Grandma Lynn, I do think is quite important, and it could be that you get a question on her. She swoops in and kind of saves the family. She's also problematic. She's an alcoholic, she smokes, she's not the best influence, but I think without her, Jack wouldn't have been able to hold the family together because he is severely distressed, whereas Grandma Lynn can take herself away from that. She also helps Lindsay in her Bildungsroman by teaching her how to do her makeup and saying to her that, it is allowed for you to wear Susie's clothes. You can do that. It's fine. So she's really important. The hecklers. So that is Sam and Hal. So Samuel Heckler is Lindsay's love interest. She's a person she loses her virginity to. She's a person she marries and has a child with. He is extremely supportive throughout everything that goes on with Susie, and he and Lindsay are a really strong rock, because Lindsay couldn't be a rock on her own. It didn't work. But with Sam on her side, she was able to really keep it together and live a life. And then Hal is Sam's older brother. He is, again, just helpful. He, takes Lindsay to the hospital when Jack is in the hospital. He is just the perfect older brother. Other than that, he's just kind of a side character. Buckley. Now, he is the youngest sibling of the Salmon family. And I think he is actually really important because at the end of the book, he is grown up and he's the one, he takes Susie's clothes and he turns them, he uses them for his garden. And I find that to be a really important scene because it shows that, it's not the end of the world that Susie has died. It's horrific and it's totally nothing that anyone should have to go through. but life can move on. And he doesn't really have great memories of it because he was so young when it was going on. He wasn't really aware of what's happened. And he kind of shows that innocence as opposed to the experience of everyone else. He also aids in that mothering issue that was going on with Abigail. Franny is Susie's intake counselor in heaven. She acts as a mother, which is what Susie needed. They explained that in heaven you can have whatever you want, whatever you need, and one thing that Susie wants and needed was a mother. Same with Holly, who's also in heaven with her. They share a lot of the same heaven, and they both wanted a mother. Ruana, or Ruana. This is Ray's mum. She might well come up in the exam. I mean, any of them could. And she is important in that she's kind of the opposite of Abigail. She clings on to her son, and she is there to defend him when he is accused, well, when he's a suspect in the murder investigation. Additionally, when Jack speaks with her, she kind of lights the fire in him because she says that if she was in his shoes, she would murder Mr. Harvey. She is strong. She is fierce. And also, I find that relationship really integral in that Jack fancies her. He finds her very attractive, but he doesn't act on that, unlike Abigail, who does with Len. Next, I've just put on the screen some example questions. So I believe this one might be from 2024. Doesn't matter. So you always get a choice of questions in the AQA exam. Usually, it will be a character and a place or a theme. So here you can see explore the significance of journeys, and that's kind of just an abstract thing, or the significance of the character of Ruana. I also have one other example. You've got Susie's feelings about family, or the character of Lindsay. So usually there will be a character and then a more abstract thing. I did a mock earlier this year, and it was the significance of Jack's salmon or the significance of George Harvey's house. I think I went with this house. So really just pick whichever you feel like you have the most evidence for and go for it. They also include an extract, as you can read here. I didn't include those, but you have to draw from that extract and then use the rest of the book. So never just look at the extract, always include other parts. So let's look at this one. So if we explore the character of Ruana in the novel, and it says the extract is where Jack visits her. So that'll be the bit where she says that she would kill Mr. Harvey if it was her. So you discuss that at first, and you'd make your points, you would explain it, use evidence, conclude your point. And then maybe you could talk about another scene. Maybe the scene where she and Abigail share a cigarette. And then continue your point, make another point, explain how they're both, evidence. So don't ever just stick to the extract, and don't just stick to the rest of the book. You need to use both. You need evidence for both. You need points for both. Always include it all, okay? And always use terminology. In every paragraph, you should have context, accurate terminology, evidence, so a quote, an explanation, an in-depth explanation. It can't just be surface level. You can't just say, Rowana was mysterious, and this, she's a mysterious character and this is important. You have to explain why it's important that she's mysterious, what value this adds to the story, who this helps, what is it in contrast to, if that's applicable. And then kind of just neatly conclude that point in a half a sentence. It doesn't need to be anything more than that. Okay, I just wanted to add some key terms. It was kind of difficult to make this slide because you should know a whole ton of terms. but I wanted to really hone in on the homodiegetic narration once again, because, like I said, you can use this in every single essay you do. And that counts as good and accurate terminology and context. So that's hitting that AO3. Analepsis, if you don't know what this is, it's kind of like a flashback. So, for example, when Susie's talking about her birthday, when she had the camera and she was taking pictures with it, that's analepsis. There's a lot of that in the book. Colloquial language, and also just any analysis of language is really helpful. I always talk about this in regards to, if I'm talking about Susie, I mean, colloquial language is used constantly, but one scene that's really good for juxtaposition between language is just before Susie gets murdered, because she's using so many colloquialisms whilst Mr. Harvey is using declaratives. Take off your coat, Susie. Full stop. And he begins by seeming friendly, but you can analyze it in a way that shows that it's fake. They're more rhetorical questions than actual, and then he gets slowly darker and darker and darker until it becomes a declarative. And then juxtaposition. I mean, I love talking about the juxtaposition between Mr. Harvey and Ray, or Ruana and Abigail, or, their speech patterns, like just then. But there's so many more terms you need to know. There's pathetic fallacy, there's all of these things, but as long as you have analepsis, colloquial language, juxtaposition, and homodiegetic narration, you're alright. You'll do okay. But also learn some more terms. So good luck. There's so much more to say about this book, but I think I should end there. Like I said, it's just kind of a quick, refresher or a quick guide if you're just beginning to do the book, or if you're about to sit your exams. Good luck. I've got mine in 2 weeks, and I feel pretty prepared, but there's always more you can be doing. So yeah.